When is the last time anybody really paid attention to the face of a general on horseback in a park? Who cares? I mean, monuments that I thought were absolutely fabulous when I was younger, I really question what I ever saw in them, and they're awfully lot of pollution, and wouldn't most people really rather have a Burger King on that spot anyway? I mean, the world is nuts. And I'm making a lot of art historical little references, sort of for my own games. But, you know, I enjoy it. If anybody sees it, fine, and if they don't, that's okay too. That certainly is not primary importance. Well, I'm not sure the idea of anti-monument is that well developed in my mind. Certainly art as clutter is a very big deal to me. I mean, I recycle everywhere I can. I don't like using plastic utensils unless I can rewash them 100 times and feel justified in having wasted the whatever. But then I'm physically making all of this stuff, and every artist I know is, and we're pouring out vast quantities of things. And I sometimes wonder if I'm improving the culture we live in or if I'm adding to the clutter. And I'm thinking of the mountains of abandoned computers out there all over the place, making trash mountains of technological things, and we haven't figured out what to do with the old trash mountains. And, you look around and see badly deteriorated public art that nobody has cared for or loved, and the physical man-hours that went into these things. And you wanted so much more for them. And you wanted, our public art to be so incredible, and it isn't. Unfortunately, I'm as guilty as a lot of other artists in earlier pieces that I've made being put in places that I'm a little ashamed of in terms of how they're kept or what's behind them or, whatever, having no control once it leaves the artist's studio. And, I just sort of started thinking that, we're tripping over stuff. And maybe it's interesting in itself. I don't know. Again, when I went to school, there was a tremendous emphasis on it wasn't good unless it was enormous. If you couldn't pick it up with a forklift, who was interested in this thing? And yet I do have a certain nostalgia for the idea of a precious object. We are in an ephemeral, throwaway kind of a world, and I still like the idea there's something out there to treasure. Now, I'm not talking about Fabergé eggs, which don't interest me at all. I like the fact that originally I thought this thing was going to be put on the floor, and people said, well, somebody might bump into it and kick it. And I said, well, okay, if they do, they'll scratch the patina. So what? It's bronze, but it's not really precious. And that's one of the reasons I like the fact that it was bronze. Had I made it in the same plastic compound that I was making these little wall pieces, if you tripped over one, you'd break it. Whereas this stuff's more durable. Now, you probably could trash it if you threw it over the side of the building or something, but bronze historically has this reputation of being fairly solid and something that'll hold up, even though the surface will scratch. And I liked the idea of trying to make something that was sort of anti-precious. Well, I think the museum had a little problem with the idea of setting it up in such a way that people could walk through it. And by the time I put this floor under it, unfortunately, it's just little planks of that Pergo stuff you buy at Home Depot. And if people walked on it, it would probably come apart because they're just sort of locked in together. Ideally, if I had set this thing up the way I wanted, it would just be on some pretty floor somewhere all by itself without a carpet or a flooring or anything and without any markers around it. But that's impractical in a museum context. But I'm hoping that, people can imagine themselves in this walking through a room of it. It's not that big a section, that they actually need to get the idea, I hope. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It changed it a lot because going from the wall to the floor, you're going from, what is the word I'm looking for, an illusionist space and a pictorial space almost, even though these were three-dimensional objects, to the real space in which you live. So that then something becomes far more animated and plausibly lifelike. I mean, obviously no one's going to look at these things and think they're looking at real animals. I'm not, expecting that anybody's going to think of them as real in any way, except for having maybe the imagination or the potential of living or having once lived.